There are too many video games. There, somebody finally said it. As fans, we just have so much to keep up with year on year, and as such, reviews, naturally, are still used as valuable resources to point players towards games that they simply can't miss. However, sometimes a title comes out, gets an insane amount of praise from media outlets and fans alike, and then immediately falls out of the conversation. And these are the games, just or otherwise, that suffered the same fate. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 out of 10 games everybody immediately forgot about. But before we begin, a disclaimer. Now, I don't want the comment section to be telling me that these games didn't get perfect scores across the board. That is true, but they all did score incredibly high and did hit 10 out of 10 in a few outlets, or at least the very high 90s. Now, with that out of the way, let's jump into number 10, Dark Souls 2. What makes Dark Souls 2 such an anomaly is that it's actually the highest rated game in the franchise. I'm not making that up. It scores 2 points higher than both the iconic and beloved original, as well as the fan favorite third game, and received 10s from The Guardian, Telegraph, Eurogamer Germany, US Gamer, and 98 on Game Informer. Yet, ask fans of this series and they'll no doubt tell you that it's the worst, or that they haven't played it at all. Those same fans were quick to forget this sequel, in part because of controversial changes to mechanics and systems that it made to the original game's formula. An altered healing system, a drastic change in approach to the level design and enemy variety were all deemed a major step back by some fans who wanted a sequel closer to the sensibilities of the first Dark Souls. The third game would provide that more iterative continuation, forgetting developments made by the second title, and hell, even the story of that trilogy capper was mostly unconcerned with addressing any of the narrative threads established in the second game. Still, while many players are content to forget that Dark Souls 2 ever happened, it is a shame that it's not recognized as a must-play title today. Sure, its elevated critical praise stinks the reviewers making good for missing out on the original, but it's still a worthy installment in the series and a daring sequel in many respects. Number 9, VIRTUA Fighter 4 and 5. When you think of the very best fighting games these days, your mind probably goes to Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, or Tekken. And while those franchises have always dominated sales, other, more critically acclaimed titles have fallen by the wayside. For instance, did you know that the original Soul Calibur is still one of the highest rated games of all time? Sitting at a 98 Metacritic score, it, alongside the first few games in the series, were deemed masterpieces. But today, you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone under the age of 25 who's played or even knows about it. And the same goes for VIRTUA Fighter. One of the longest-running fighting franchises in the business, the 4th and 5th games in particular gained insanely strong reviews, 94 and 85 respectively, yet were completely overshadowed by their contemporaries. Despite being the franchise of choice for many a hardcore fighting game fanatic, to the general public, these well-regarded games are nothing more than box art that they remember while perusing stores decades ago. Number 8, Wolfenstein 2, The New Colossus. Most people today do remember Wolfenstein 2 as a pretty good game. It was a solid shooter that promised more than it could deliver, bolstered by a colourful story and some truly insane plot twists. However, it might surprise you to realise just how highly Bethesda's follow-up was rated at the time, sitting at an incredible 88 on Metacritic. And yet, despite those aforementioned plot twists that still get talked about today, nobody really remembers it as a game. The set pieces, the moment-to-moment shooting, interplay between stealth and action, it all just kinda fell by the wayside. The aforementioned score, though, points towards this being one of the best shooters of the entire generation. But players online are more likely to sing the praises of its predecessor or id Software's 2016 Doom reboot. Maybe it was too iterative, or maybe Doom itself completely overshadowed it in terms of its mechanical fluidity and impact, but either way, this great game has been forgotten when discussing the best of the best of last gen's FPS library. Number 7, The Chronicles of Riddick: Escape from Butcher Bay. Back in an era where most movie licensed games were poison, The Chronicles of Riddick: Escape from Butcher Bay was a rare tonic. Rather than just a bland cash-in, the team wanted to get this adaptation right. No doubt bolstered that the star of the Riddick movies, Vin Diesel, was an avid gamer himself. The Xbox exclusive scored surprisingly high on Metacritic, with GameSpot in particular awarding the game 93 out of 100, with praise going to its atmospheric presentation, visceral first-person combat and stealth, and intricate level design. Sadly, that praise didn't translate to sales, and the tepid reception reception of the movie probably didn't help much either, as most players ended up sleeping on the game. Confident in its quality though, a remake/sequel was produced called The Chronicles of Riddick: Assault on Dark Athena for the Xbox 360. Despite being loved by some outlets again, it overall scored lower than its predecessor, and once again was instantly forgotten by players, killing the franchise dead. Number 6, Rayman Legends. Ubisoft is no stranger to mishandling amazing franchises. The likes of Ghost Recon, Splinter Cell, Prince of Persia, and more have been languishing for years now, either sitting out entire generations or being transformed into mainstream-pleasing shells of their former selves. Why this treatment particularly stings when it comes to Rayman though, is that the series was on a roll when it was unceremoniously dropped. Rayman Origins and Rayman Legends in particular are some of the highest rated Ubisoft games ever produced, and completely revolutionized a flagging franchise with creative ideas, tight platforming mechanics, and a renewed sense of passion. Because it wasn't an open world box-ticking bloatfest though, the publisher was all too content to sweep the titles under the carpet and try to shift players' focus elsewhere. Consequently, in 2023, it's tough to remember that Ubisoft ever made games like this, let alone allowed one of their most beloved franchises to do something so different to their usual formula. Number 5, Splinter Cell Double Agent. Generally, Splinter Cell Double Agent didn't have much of a shelf life. The follow-up to the classic Chaos Theory attempted to provide a slight reinvention for the franchise, bolstered by the move to the then futuristic hardware of the Xbox 360. It reviewed extremely well, but the higher rated Xbox and PS2 versions were kind of instantly forgotten. Why? Well, because they were radically different to the fancier next-gen version that received most of the attention and the biggest marketing push from Ubisoft. These days, we take it for granted that big games are going to receive cross-gen releases at the start of a new generation, but back in the era of Double Agent, you often just got two different versions of a game made by two completely different studios. And despite the fact that the original Xbox version of Double Agent provided a more polished and robust stealth experience that resonated with fans and critics, earning scores in the 90s, including a 93 from official Xbox magazine, it was seen as the inferior product when compared to its next-gen counterpart, and overlooked by fans as a result. Hell, it wasn't even canon, meaning Ubisoft themselves were eager to forget it as they moved on to the next game in the series. Number 4, Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker. Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker is one of the most important games in the entire franchise. The key narrative and gameplay bridge between Metal Gear Solid 3 and the final game in the series, The Phantom Pain, it's an absolutely essential installment directed by Hideo Kojima. And yet, there's a reason why this critically beloved game was forgotten about until fans had to play catch-up in order to understand what the hell was going on in MGS5, and that's the fact that it released exclusively for the PSP. While it later did get a HD remaster for consoles, it was initially just unclear how important the game was. Well, most of the mechanics that you loved from MGS5 are present here, albeit in a more rudimentary form, while it also moved the story of Big Boss on leaps and bounds from the climax of MGS3. But again, it was on the PSP. While every other main installment was talked about for years after its release, even today, Peace Walker isn't appreciated or fully respected when it comes to ranking the entire franchise. Number 3, Max Payne 3. Rockstar is one of those companies that causes a cultural shift every time it releases a game. The GTA titles, Red Dead, Bully, we talk about them to death, picking apart their differences and recalling fond memories of being absorbed by each one. And yet, one of Rockstar's best games, Max Payne 3, failed to receive this kind of longevity. A departure from the studio's open-world fare, this release instead offered fans a dark, narrative-driven, linear, third-person shooter experience that stayed true to the company's attention to detail and polish. Despite being more straightforward though, it did seem like another surefire hit. The strong critical reviews helped, including a 10 out of 10 from Games Radar, as did Rockstar's own reputation following the release of LA Noire and Red Dead Redemption. Max Payne 3, though, was a rare commercial disappointment for the company, and stands as one of the few titles they've developed that isn't discussed as an all-time great. Now, don't get me wrong, it absolutely should be, but the mammoth success of GTA 5 just a year after Max's third outing hit shelves meant that nobody was pining for a return to this series, and tragically we've not received a follow-up since. Number 2, Tomb Raider. Tomb Raider deserved better. The reboot trilogy, which kicked off with 2013's incredible inaugural release, received solid reviews across the board, with the first two installments in particular being marked as some of the best action-adventure games of their time. So, what ensured that, despite their their warm reception, they'd be left behind by players and ultimately leave the iconic franchise in a state of unpopularity? Well, a couple of things. The doomed exclusivity deal with Microsoft for the second game, Rise of the Tomb Raider, certainly didn't help, minimizing the potential audience and stalling the momentum. The huge success of Uncharted also has to be a factor, serving as a more popular franchise which many viewed as being capable of doing everything Tomb Raider could do, only better. Even with this in mind though, the Tomb Raider trilogy should have been a smash hit, some of the biggest names of the last generation, but instead, all three games are doomed to forever be overlooked. Number 1, Deathloop. Everyone thought they knew exactly what Deathloop was going to be before it came out. Arkane's prior releases were cult favorites, getting solid reviews but not setting the world on fire. So players assumed that this title, with its strange time loop formula and asymmetrical multiplayer, would follow suit. That wasn't the case though, and Deathloop instantly became one of the strongest releases of the year, nabbing multiple 10 out of 10 scores which intrigued casual fans who previously wouldn't have looked twice. Unfortunately, players didn't have the same response as critics. While it was still broadly well received and loved by some, the general consensus was that Arkane's other games, including Dishonored and Prey, were just as good, if not better. Despite being such a critical hit then, Deathloop went on to become a commercial disappointment. It fell out of the conversation rather quickly and over a year later is not discussed anywhere near as much as other 10 out of 10 darlings. So that's our list. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Do you love these games as much as the critics did, and do you wish they were still talked about today? I know I certainly do for Max Payne 3 and will never shut up about that thing even when I'm dead. Let me know, and while you're down there, if you could also please give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to WhatCulture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. Even if you don't though, I've been Josh, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.